So, if we think about this transition from all these different determinants of health, so from the very distal determinants of health to the proximal determinants of health that we've dealt with previously, where the health outcome is down here, so health outcome. Um, Development, globalization, and health, we're very much talking about these very big system issues, so the very distal determinants of health. The first part of this lecture is looking at the basic concepts of development and capitalism and how they've um, they've come together to get us where we are at the moment. Um, Development means different things to different people. Um, it's centered on how we've arrived at where we've arrived at, and it's very value laden. So basically, we talk a lot about progress, and progress is pretty well a fairly subjective term because some people believe that the development pathway that we're on is not progress, it's or advancement for that matter. Um, it's about economic growth, that's for sure, but it's it more or less adheres to this naturalist concept of development. That is, it's taken a place according to historical rules or laws. Now, the thing is about this is that the historical rules, historical laws, are now coming into question because we can't possibly um, continue on the way we've been continuing, and hopefully you'll be able to understand what I mean by that argument as we move through this material. So, again, we talk about development. So there's this process of development. Now, this again is very value laden because, in fact, if you think about the life of the hunter-gatherers, there's still probably a few hunter-gatherer communities left in the world. In many respects, they're very much at one with the earth, and in fact, from that perspective, they're very advanced in terms of human civilization and culture. But generally speaking, we think, in fact, the opposite. This is the most primitive end of human existence, and basically what we've been able to do through this whole process of learning how to manipulate plants, mainstream agriculture, and then industrialization is a process of how the human race has developed over time. And this is what we're talking about. When we talk about development, especially, we're talking about this. So, when we talk about human existence on Earth, in comparison to other species, Homo sapiens is a relatively new species. We might think about it as only being perhaps 2 million years old, which compared to crocodiles and even the humble cockroach is fairly recent. It's very successful. We've basically overrun the Earth. We completely dominate the Earth, which, for the most part, is successful. But if we start over dominating the Earth and basically steering it in another direction, then that takes us beyond success to potential failure. And there are various key developments in human civilization which have enabled Homo sapiens to do this. The advent of tools, for example, also able to actually cover quite a lot of different environments over the course of history rather than just being centered in one geographical area. Being able to manipulate plants to our own use, able to find power that doesn't rely on us. The best example, of course, is the combustion engine, where we can actually travel from one point to another without actually having to invest any of our own energy. And of course, industrialization, the industrial production systems that we have developed to produce goods. And if we think about the progression of technology over time, many of the technologies that we have today, we would not have been able to think about. It's not much more than 100 years ago than something like a telephone would have been considered inconceivable to actually talk to somebody from one side of the country to the other. Computers, the automobile, certainly flying is something that has only recently been possible. Man or humans have dreamt of flying for many, many centuries, but it's only in the last century that's been possible. Um, so for some humans, material and living conditions have improved substantially to a point where we really can go throughout our whole lives without having to really lift a finger in effort. And this is confirmed and reflected in increasing life expectancy and declining global age-adjusted mortality rates. Now, again, this is more pronounced in certain countries, and not every country has this privilege. But if we look at the general life expectancy of men and women over the years, you can see here that certainly since the mid-1850s, which is about when the germ theory and bacteria were discovered, and we were able to actually understand how diseases were spread, that this dramatic rise in life expectancy occurred both in men and women. You will see here that women consistently had a higher life expectancy over that 150 years than men. World population growth is a substantial issue, and you can see here that until only perhaps only sort of the late 1800s was there really this spike, this exponential leap in world population. You can see here that we're up around the 9 billion mark at the moment, but it won't be long. It'll probably be the middle of the century when we hit 10 billion. And really, it's a dramatic exponential increase in population. And really, it has some experts wondering about whether we will have enough resources in terms of the basics like food and water to be able to sustain this growth. But of course, the picture, that was an average sort of global numbers picture, but of course there's the haves and the have-not, and this diagram shows you that in fact there are two ends of the spectrum. If we compare, for example, the prevalence of underweight and overweight in terms of the top 6 countries, you'll see here that in a country like Bangladesh, which is slowly sinking into the sea, in fact, it's one of the most densely populated countries in the world. They've got a prevalence of 56% of all children who are underweight, whereas you've got the other end of the spectrum where 55% of all adults in the mid-1990s, it's gone up since then, were overweight, and now up around 67%. And you can see here that these two lists of countries don't share. They're not shared between these two lists, so they're very different groups of countries. Generally, the haves and have-nots. So the benefits of any positive impact of development have not been shared equally across the world. Now, if we think of development in terms of industrialization and the result of industrial capitalism, industrial capitalism is a complex form of economic organization. The point about economic organization is that it is the focus. So one politician in Australia, I can't recall who it was, but it's a very famous quote. When anybody asks about the well-being of Australia, he would respond, "It's the economy, stupid." And certainly there's a real emphasis on growth. And development equals growth, so economic growth. So growth in production, growth in markets, growth in wealth, growth essentially, and our whole economic system is based on that. Now, it's interesting to actually note while we're thinking about growth that in fact, if we think about the issue of obesity, what we're trying to do with obesity, in fact, is about reducing consumption. So reducing consumption. But when we've got an economic system where we want to grow consumption, grow markets, grow production, you can see here that there's there's a discontinuum, a discord between these two ideas. So in a development and industrialization model with the increasing obesity, it's really inconsistent to think that the economic system necessarily, the system within which we live, we can rely on that to actually help us with this issue of obesity. If we further look at the market economy and capitalism, it pervades all levels of society, so it's everywhere. Even what we do, so our labour is built into the economic system when we think about capitalism. And the price of goods is actually determined by market forces, and there's two sides to the market forces. There's supply and there's demand, and basically that determines price. So when we think about institutions and institutionalization, there's a heavy reliance on the market to sort everything out, and the assumption that market forces will generate the best outcomes for society. Very much, as I said previously with growth, consumption is very much a key element, as is individualism. So there's an individual competitiveness that pervades through capitalism. So, and we think about individualism, we think about individual responsibility as well. So when we're thinking about looking after our own health and health promotion, this concept of capitalism and market-driven systems basically is somewhat incongruous with health promotion, because we're thinking about the individual all the time with capitalism, but with health promotion we're thinking about collectivism and the benefit of the society as a whole. And so with institutionalization and capitalism, there's a tendency to externalize social, health, and environmental impacts of decisions. And this again is very, very important. So this cartoon, there's a couple of cartoons that actually explain very clearly the idea of capitalism versus social justice and social benefit. And you can see here that the suppliers of whatever goods we're talking about, so we're talking about oil in this cartoon, I mean, obviously for self-interest, the seller of this is going to sell their oil to the highest bidder. A more socially oriented objective would drive the seller back to the least advantaged. So with market-driven economies, this is very much the way resources are handed out. And again, we saw this, in fact, we don't deal with it in this course, but clearly the Irish potato famine in 1865 or thereabouts, there was a real problem because a lot of the landowners were actually English, and basically they had a choice as to whether to grow crops to feed the local people or grow crops to export to England, and they chose the latter. And basically it disadvantaged the local population in a fairly disastrous way. So capitalism and individualistic ideology was founded on four assumptions, essentially: that humans are driven and motivated solely by self-interest, the action that results in the greatest financial gain benefits society, competitive behavior by individuals is more beneficial to society, and also increases in consumption are the best measure of social progress. So the sum total of this is that those who consume the most also contribute the most, and that these are the assumptions. Now, they may or may not be correct, and further from this, there's a real assumption that, and we hear it every day, this sort of trickle-down effect of the benefits of capitalism. That is that one of the big advantages of one person getting rich is that occasionally some crumbs will drop down and advantage the poor. And we see this time and time again in the media, the electronic and print media, that if countries go through industrialization and development, then everybody will win. But clearly, it's certainly not the main objective of development.